It's in moments like these when I wish my mother was here. My rule in life is if I'm doing right by wise Latinas and Jewish mothers, I must be succeeding as an elected official. But I'm Congressman Ritchie Torres. My local rabbi calls me Ritchie Torah. And I am proud to be here with you, and I'm proud to stand with both the Jewish people and the Jewish state. You know, people often ask me, Ritchie, you're not Jewish. You're a black, Latino, gay man from the Bronx. Have all these identities, too many to count. Why do you speak out so forcefully against anti-Semitism? And I simply reply that I reject the premise of your question. I reject the notion that one must be Jewish to combat anti-Semitism. Just like I would reject the notion that one must be black to combat anti-black racism. "70 years ago, AJC was part of the litigation that led to one of the greatest cases in the history of the Supreme Court, Brown versus Board of Education, the beginning of the end of Jim Crow. And 60 years ago, we saw Jewish Americans give their lives for the cause of civil rights. Michael Schworn and Andrew Goodman, as well as James Chaney, were barbarically murdered in the Mississippi burning so that black Americans could have the right to live freely, unencumbered by the cruelty and inhumanity of Jim Crow. And so the lesson learned from history is that we're all in this together. We all have an obligation. We all have an obligation to fight anti-Semitism, no matter what form it takes and no matter what direction from which it comes. And so I come here with a simple message: you are not alone. I stand with you. The majority of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, stand with you, and most of America stands with you. When I'm reflecting on October 7th, I'm reminded of the words of Associate Justice Robert Jackson, who was the chief prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials. And in his opening statement, he said, "The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish are so calculating, so malignant, so devastating, that we cannot tolerate their being ignored because we cannot survive it being repeated." Those same words must be spoken about October 7th. Israel cannot tolerate October 7th being ignored because the Jewish state cannot survive it being repeated. For me, October 7th was a crime against humanity so barbaric that it cannot be ignored, it cannot go unpunished. Hamas must be removed from power. The perpetrators of Hamas, like Sinwar, must be brought to justice. And the hostages must be released. Israel has a right to defend itself against Hamas in the wake of October 7th, just like the United States had a right to defend itself against al-Qaeda in the wake of 9/11. Self-defense is the right and responsibility and raison d'etre of every nation state, and the Jewish nation state should never be an exception to the rule of self-defense. Now, the international community has not been part of the solution. It has been part of the problem. We've seen the international community aggressively pressure Israel to keep Hamas in power. But far fewer in the international community have been pressuring Hamas to release the hostages. In fact, the international pressure has been so overwhelmingly one-sided against Israel that Hamas has felt emboldened to delay the release of the hostages and to delay the end of the war. We all want to see an end to the wretchedness of the war in Gaza. But the end of the war requires, above all else, the release of the hostages. Hamas has the power to end the war that it began and to release the hostages it abducted. If Hamas were to surrender unconditionally and release the hostages, the war would end tomorrow. To paraphrase Golda Meir, if the Islamic Republic of Iran and Hezbollah and the Houthis and Hamas were to lay down their arms, there would be peace. But if Israel were to lay down its arms, there would be no Israel. And not only does the media demonize Israel for defending itself, it even demonizes Israel for daring to rescue the hostages. Like, the disinformation is overwhelming, so I want to set the record straight. If you are holding hostages captive in your home, you are not a civilian and a journalist. You are a combatant and a terrorist. A second fact, if you're part of an encampment and you're calling for the violent destruction of Israel as a Jewish state, you are not anti-war and pro-peace, you are pro-war and anti-peace. And then finally, I have a message not only for the media, but for the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice and the United Nations. There is no moral equivalence between Hamas and Israel. When you draw a false equivalence between Hamas and Israel, when you blur the line between accidents and war crimes, when you blur the line between tragedies and atrocities, you are politicizing international law. You are weaponizing it, and you are ultimately destroying it. And what we've seen in a post-October 7th world is not only the destruction of law, but also language. The word genocide no longer carries the moral weight it once commanded. Anti-Semitism poisons everything it touches, including language and law. You know, it's often said that AJC is the State Department of the Jewish community. And if there were ever a need for the Jewish community to have a State Department, that need is right now. All of you are on the front lines of defending both the Jewish people and the Jewish state. And so I stand with you. My promise to you is that I will be an oasis of moral clarity in what feels like a desert of disinformation and delegitimation and double standards against Israel as a Jewish state. We live in a world of moral confusion, and I will strive to be a fearless truth teller in a world of lies. And fear is the operative word. For me, the greatest threat to the U.S.-Israel relationship, The greatest threat to our democracy does not come from the far right or from the far left. It comes from the cowardice of a center that lives in fear of the extremes. Franklin Roosevelt was exactly right when he said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. As a member of Congress, I will never live or govern out of fear. The Achilles heel of most politicians is a pathological need to be loved by everyone. And I thank God every day that I'm so socially ill-adjusted that I have a need to be loved by no one. But when you give up the need to be loved, that is the beginning of leadership. And we are willing, we as Zionists are willing, and yes, I am a Zionist. It is not a mark of shame, it's a badge of honor. But we as Zionists are willing to stand up for what we believe is right, even if it means standing alone, and even if it means facing excommunication from the progressive movement. And I will end on this note because I've spoken for too long. Okay. Well, I guess I have to pander to the audience. A few months ago, I traveled to Israel for the first time since October 7th. I ran into your CEO, Ted Deutsch, who is the ultimate mensch. I went to the Kibbutz Nir Oz, where 1/4 of the population was either abducted or murdered. And I went to the scene of the Nova Music Festival massacre, where I met one of the producers, Ophir Mir. And Ophir lost hundreds of his friends in the massacre on October 7th. He sustained multiple gun wounds. But despite everything that he had suffered, he never lost hope. He reminded me that hope is the anthem of the Jewish people. And he proudly wore a tag that said, "We will dance again." And so I'm here to report that the music of the Jewish people will never end, that Israel will dance again, and that both the Jewish state and the Jewish people will emerge from the tragedy of October 7th better and stronger, more resilient and more unified than ever before. Israel will outlive its enemies. It will outlive the Islamic Republic of Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. It will outlive the BDS movement. Israel will live on for the next 76 years and beyond. Am Israel Chai. Thank you.